Hello, I'm Loda Smits for the Finance News Network, and joining me from Commsec is economist Savanth Sebastian. Savanth, welcome back to FNN.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Commsec has just released its quarterly State of the States report, which looks at the economic performance of Australian states and territories. So, Savanth, which states are dominating and which are lagging?
Well, I guess if we look at the indicators and across the states, it was pretty clear that Western Australia was the premier state. There was no slippage in rankings over the past 3 months. And if anything, we saw that the resource states started to see some level of ascendancy. The Northern Territory actually leapfrogged the ACT into second spot. And then you've got the other states and territories sort of bunched in the middle. And then you've got a gap towards South Australia and an even bigger gap towards Tasmania, which is really lagging across all the states and territories.
So which states have been the biggest movers and what's behind their pickup in performance?
Yeah, look, I think the Northern Territory was probably the biggest improver over the past 3 months. It seemed to suggest that there has been a pretty healthy improvement taking place in the Northern Territory across the key economic indicators, from economic growth through to business investment.
And which states are underperforming and at risk of further contraction?
The one area that was probably the one state that pulled back was the ACT, and it really struggled because business investment pulled back in the quarter quite substantially. I think you look at Queensland and it seemed to move away from New South Wales and Victoria, which was where it was 3 months ago. It's moved into third position with the ACT, and then you've got New South Wales and Victoria sort of bunched together in the middle. So I really think it was those resource states that started to move towards the top end of the scale.
Looking closer at the individual states, the report found that New South Wales and Victoria were closely grouped together, but which state is the best positioned to outperform in the future?
I think New South Wales is probably best positioned to outperform, largely due to the fact that its housing sector is probably 6 to 9 months ahead of what we saw in Victoria. In Victoria, over the past 12 months, it's really been a lack of manufacturing activity, a pullback in the manufacturing sector, and probably increase in unemployment that has bubbled out across the Victorian economy. Here in New South Wales, we're starting to see that housing sector is really going to be a multiplier for growth across the New South Wales economy. They've got housing finance up around 20% on a year ago. That's a very good, strong lead indicator for broad-based economic growth.
Now, Western Australia is still on top, as you mentioned, but with talk of the investment boom being over, how long can this state remain strong?
Yeah, I think if you look at the broader implications of the State of the States report, you're seeing that certainly WA is the premier state, but there are some indicators that are starting to pull back in terms of equipment investment, which has pulled back substantially, still at some heady levels, but it's pulling back quite quickly. Now, the key here is that we're moving away from an investment boom to a production boom. And when you move into a production boom, you start to see volumes and income stories starting to lift. So it was interesting to note that Western Australia had the strongest retail sales across the nation. So I think that income story will support and cushion the state, and keep in mind low interest rates is starting to foster household confidence as well.
So Savanth, how does your outlook for Australia's mining sector translate to resource stocks over the year ahead?
Yeah, I think certainly the resource sector was under some pressure over 2013. It's probably going to be a better year over 2014. We've seen the downside risk to global growth have diminished. A lot of these mining investment firms have pulled back in terms of capital costs, and really it's about income flow and trying to effectively increase production output. So that's going to result in higher profitability over 2014. And we've already seen that since the start of this year, base metal prices have seen some pretty healthy gains. There's a talk of tight supply in some of those markets, and that will continue to support the mining sector.
Finally, Savanth, the mining sector was last year's worst performer. How do you see it trending this year?
Look, I think we will see over 2014 that investors start shifting away from high-yielding stocks towards growth-focused stocks. And I think we've already seen that in the last couple of weeks, where the banking sector has really taken a backward step, despite strong earnings expected over 2014. And you're seeing that shift towards the resource stocks. It's all about growth 2014. I think the downside risks have certainly diminished. Low interest rates will start to support consumption globally, and that's the real story for the resource stocks.
Savanth Sebastian, thank you so much for your outlook today.
Thanks very much.